Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I'm going to do a press plate resist technique. Now, this is exactly like emboss resist, but we're going to use this floral view press plate, and we're going to do some clear embossing on the background, and then I'm going to do some magicals to color it in. Now, I just got this new Under the Boardwalk magicals. I didn't realize it was flat though. So I'm going to do two of them. I'm going to do the Under the Boardwalk on one background, and I'm going to do the Victorian Bouquet on another. And Victorian Bouquet is one of my favorite ones, and it has some beautiful shimmer to it. So we're going to compare the two of them. The flat magicals don't have any of that shimmer quality to them. So we'll see what the two backgrounds look like between the two different color combinations. So I have my Betterpress out here, and I put the press plate on the background or on that base and ink it up with some Versamark ink. I have a piece of distressed watercolor cardstock that I taped to the clear plate and then put the two together, put them through my Platinum 6 machine for the pressure to press that plate in there. And then with that sticky Versamark ink on that background, I'm going to add some clear embossing powder. Now you could use whatever color embossing if you want here. By using the clear, that color of the cardstock or the watercolor paper is just going to shine through. So I'm just going to get some white lines here. If you used colored embossing powder, you would have whatever that color would be showing through. So when we use the magicals, the water from that is going to be resisted by that embossing. So that is what creates the resist part. Now, if you wanted to, you could go ahead and add an extra step after this and put this between two pieces of newsprint and melt that embossing away and then just have or reveal the plain cardstock. But I don't do this. I like that embossed shine that is in there, so I leave it there. But that is another option if you wanted to take it a step further. It looks a little bit more like a batik background if you do that, but both are absolutely gorgeous. With the clear powder here, I'm just using my heat tool to melt that powder and make sure that it's completely melted. It is a little bit more challenging when you're using Betterpress to do the emboss resist because it also presses into that cardstock. Sometimes you have to tilt the paper into the light just to be able to see what has been melted and what hasn't. So I did that a second time on a second piece of cardstock. I'm going to use the flat magicals on this piece on the left, and my Victorian Bouquet one is going to be used on the watercolor cardstock on the right. Now what I like to do is I'm working on a Tim Holtz surface media mat here, but I like to mist the back of the cardstock as well as the surface, suction that cardstock in place before misting the front. And by having both the front and the back of the cardstock misted, I find that the cardstock warps a lot less and the paper tends to stay flatter when drying, and you don't end up having it curl up and have that water or the dye or magicals flow down. So you get the inks tend to stay where you want them to. You can see the one on the right, I only misted the back of the cardstock, and you can see how it is kind of cupping and curling forward. By having both the front and the back of the cardstock misted, I'm avoiding that. And as soon as I go and take my mister and mist the front of that cardstock, you'll see that it kind of starts to relax, and it starts to flatten out because both sides of the cardstock is wet. Now by doing this, it also extends the drying time, so it does take a lot longer for this to dry. If I'm worried about it, what I will often do is I will just watch it, and as soon as the cardstock has absorbed most of the moisture, I will lift it off of the media surface mat and just put it on some paper towels so that some airflow gets to that back, and that will help it dry a little bit faster. The other thing that I tend to do, and this is what I normally do rather than watching it, is I will do this later towards the day and then leave it alone to dry overnight, and by the morning it's completely dry. So I have a fan brush here, and I used every single color from each one of those magical sets, used a fan brush and just brushed them, or just picked up the color and tapped my brush to have it go onto that background, and then misted that cardstock again to get those ink colors to flow. I'm using a lot of color here. I like when these colors are very vibrant. It really sets off the contrast between the embossing and the cardstock color showing through and the color of the magicals. But you could definitely use less powder, more water, and have a little bit more of a subtle color combination or a subtle background. So here are those two completely dried, and I was quite surprised to see how close those colors are. So the one on the left here, the one that I'm lifting up, this one is the Under the Boardwalk Flat Magicals, what that doesn't have any shimmer, and the one on the right has the Victorian Bouquet Magicals that do have the shimmer to them. So I'm using these two backgrounds as a background for my card. And because there's so much color and vibrancy to that, when I add my embellishments to the front of my card, I'm not interested in adding even more color. You definitely could if you want, but I want those colors to just kind of speak for themselves and be the focal point of the card. So rather than getting too elaborate with the rest of the card, I kept it very, very simple. I have these beautiful butterfly die cuts from Spellbinders. They're called Brilliant Butterflies. And then I have that friend die cut from the Anemone Glimmer Blooms set. And I'm just die cutting them in white. Both of these butterflies, as well as that friend, has a shadow, and I'm doing that shadow just in white vellum. So it's going to kind of mute the colors behind it and really let those white die cuts kind of shine. And I love the contrast of the really bright background with just white die cuts, very simple white die cuts. Now you could change this background up and you could have embossed with black and then used black die cuts. I think that would be absolutely gorgeous as well. Or say if you did gold or silver, do gold or silver die cuts so that those would tie in with the background, but it wouldn't take away or take anything away from those brightly colored magicals backgrounds. Now, because I am using glue on vellum and because it's liquid glue and vellum typically doesn't like glue, I'm trying to use as little as possible, and I'm putting an acrylic block on those pieces to hold them down, hold them nice and flat while they're drying. I also am using Barely Art glue, and I'm using little tiny bits of it so that I'm not getting too much moisture on that vellum. For those butterflies, I only glued down the center of the body because once the card is done, I want to be able to kind of tilt those butterfly wings up and add a little bit of dimension. The Magicals backgrounds, I die cut them, or I trimmed them down so that they're 4 inches by 5 1/4. So then when I put them on my 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch card, I'll have a white outline around them, and that will also tie in with those die cuts as well as the white peeking out from the embossing. When I've glued them onto the background of that card base, I put those acrylic blocks right back on there just to hold everything down so that it glues down nice and flat. And then I'm going to glue my die cut pieces on there. Now, because I have that vellum there, I'm only putting that glue right behind the solid white die cut part so that it's not visible. And once again, I'll put an acrylic block on there to hold everything down. Doing that same layout for both of them. You could definitely change this up. I think this would be a beautiful background even for like a floral die cut or something like that. I hadn't used these butterfly dies yet, so I really wanted to pull them out and use them on something, and I absolutely love how simple but beautiful they are on the background of this colorful background. So now that that is completely dried, I can take my fingers underneath those butterfly wing silhouettes and just tilt them up, bend them up just a tiny little bit, and just add a touch of dimension there. Now, you could leave this as is, but I wanted to amp up those die cuts just a touch more, but I didn't want to add any color. So what I did was I put some glossy accents on the bodies of those butterflies, and then I took some Stickles and just added them on the outside part of the butterfly wings. I didn't put it over the entire thing, just on the outer edge to add just a touch of sparkle. And this particular Stickles doesn't add any color to it. It's just going to make it sparkle a little bit more in the light. So with those on there, I will let that completely dry. And it really depends on how much you add there as to how long it's going to take to dry. It really doesn't take a long time, but you do want to make sure that it's completely dry before you touch it. I'll typically do something like this, and then I will completely leave the room because I know if I'm still working in the room, that's the first place I'm going to put something. So now that it's completely dried, here is our two finished cards. This first one here is the Victorian Bouquet Magicals background, and you can see that shimmer that you get from those magical colors. And I typically don't like the flat backgrounds, but I actually really, really like this. I really love the colors to it. I thought I was going to miss the shimmer on that background, but I really don't. Now, if you wanted to add shimmer to this background because it didn't already have it in those magical powders, what you could easily do is put some Perfect Pearls in a spray bottle with some water and add your own shimmer mist to that to include that shimmer. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you being here. Have a fantastic day.